Welcome everybody to Oregon State University Permaculture Design Pro class. We are into the very last session for the Pro class. That was the winter and fall and winter of the last two sessions, two quarters. We've got just a few questions here, so if anybody has additional questions, feel free to ask. So, Gord, I'm gonna share my screen because you've got the monopoly on the questions today, which is awesome. I still have a little bit of this bug, so thus the voice. And if I mute myself and start coughing, that's why. So Corey, can you talk a little bit more about volunteering to do a few designs upfront to get experience? Specifically, what limit should I set, scope, space, time, etc.? What if more detailed drawings are required for certain components? But this usually includes supervised implementation and installation. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this from the global, get patterns to details. So when you're starting out in design, within regenerative land design or permaculture design, all of us have two major debts. And our first debt is a time. We have a time debt. We have amount of time we have to invest into this field, this skill, whatever it might be. And the other thing we have a big debt in is ignorance. We have to pay down our ignorance debt, the things we don't know. Now, one of the ways to shorten both of those is to do as many projects as you can. Small projects, big projects, doesn't matter. Because ultimately, the portfolio of work you have will allow potential clients to see what they could be involved in. And this includes design portfolio, and this includes in-ground portfolio, and this includes maturing designs over the years. So that's an important piece because some people will hire you for design, some people will hire you for installation, some people will hire you for what the design will become. And most people will do that. Most people will hire you for what the design will become. And this will depend on a number of factors. If you're just doing design, if you're doing design installation or design build, as it's usually called, or if you're doing design, build, installation, and maintenance, because maintenance can really keep a business going. Design and installation is hit and miss until you get well known and you're just chocker block and you're 6 to 8 months booked in advance. But maintenance, going back in doing the maintenance on gardens can keep you afloat. So my suggestion is, and I eventually did this. It wasn't something I started off doing. I didn't have this as an idea. I had to learn this, was do as many projects as you can to completion with your full focus. Don't get me wrong. Like, I want you to do a lot of projects, but I don't want you to do them all at once. So really be conscientious of how many projects you can do at the same time. I found over the years, I really like doing one project at a time. I don't like having multiple projects at multiple phases. Just doesn't do it for me. If I had a bigger crew and a bigger design collective, as I've been a part of in the past, it's okay. But I really like working on one thing and having completion to it and really feeling good with it. So what I would suggest is, in terms of scope, space, and time, that goes back to you in terms of what are you willing to give for the experience of having a design in the ground. And this is where reaching out to friends and family and saying, hey, I just took this course. I'm really excited. I really want to do some design work and some installation work. I'm going to prioritize the individuals that want design and installation over the folks that just want design. And for the first 3 projects, I'm willing to work for free, but I need you to show up. So what I might do, and I'm coaching a former student on this now, is that they require a deposit. I think they were asking for something nominal, like $500. And the client gets that back at the end of the design and back at the end of the installation, because they really wanted to ensure that they would continue to answer questions and meet with them and get the information they needed to get the design. So it was a way to get engagement with people, because when you offer things for free, sometimes folks can be a little lackluster. What I wouldn't do in terms of scope is I wouldn't take on anything big upfront. I would take on a side yard, a front yard, a backyard, a small thing, making a compost bin for somebody. Basically just doing the small things you know how to do And then if you do take on work that's a little bit larger than the scope of what you feel comfortable with, then going out and doing what I did, which is hiring out mentors, instructors, things like that, paying them their rate to go through the design work with you. So the first 3 to 6 designs I did, I hired my instructor from my permaculture design course, and I just paid him. I just paid him outright. I'm like, help me out here. This is what I'm thinking. Am I right? Am I wrong? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? And it was invaluable. Like it was more invaluable than anything I've ever done, because I was taking somebody's brain and boring their brain and applying it to my problem. But more so, I said, I want you to teach me how to do this right, so I don't mess up in the future. And I've continued to do that to this day in many ways, because actually, funny enough, I was just talking with that instructor who's now become a close friend. And we kind of joke that in some ways, I now have become a mentor to him in some of the things we do, and vice versa. It's kind of enjoyable. But I picked up a project near him, and he's like, what about that project? Because I talk about these projects with him, and we'll probably go and do a little site visit together. But I always leave a little bit in my budget to allow for another designer to go over my work. I call it red team design. And basically, I do a full design brief, and very similar, if not exactly what we're doing here. But I use the keyline scale of permanence for all things agricultural as my framework. And he goes over that, and then he tells me why I'm wrong. Just flat up, I give him a red marker. Metaphorically, I give him a red marker, and I'm like, tell me why I'm wrong. And it's amazing the things he finds. He finds things that improve the design and improve my thinking and improve the conversation. So that could be really amazing. In terms of space, same thing with scope. So I would work on something you don't feel overwhelmed by. So if somebody's like, yeah, I'd like my backyard done, it's like, well, how about I do a couple of boxes for you? How about I do like some wicking bed boxes or something simple that you know you can complete? Because if you get outside of your comfort zone, I don't know if anybody knows the flow diagram for challenge and skill, and you want to kind of stay in the center there. If you get over challenged, then you get overwhelmed and frustrated, and imposter syndrome comes in big. And if you get underwhelmed, then you get bored. But I would do it that way. And then similarly with time, I'd be conscientious, where it's like, if I was talking to somebody and I really wanted to do this, I would say, listen, I want this project done in 3 months, which is another reason why I would use something like a refundable deposit or something like that if they finished, of course. And I would go at it that way, because I want to make sure that the client shows up, even if they're, if it's a volunteering client. The other thing I'll say, and this was a brilliant idea that Eric Olson of Permaculture Artisans down in the States told me, right at the beginning, he reached out to City Hall and he said, I'd like to do an edible native landscape around City Hall. And at the time, he was a very diversified outfit. So he had a number of people from a number of ethnicities in his crew. And then he reached out to local indigene. And he did this design for free. The city paid for the plants. Everyone volunteered. And he told me that was his only marketing for 2 years. For 2 years, he got jobs off of this. It was just, people loved it. They liked it. It was the most important thing that they said they had seen done in the area, and they knew that he had the heart and the intelligence to carry what it is they wanted to do. So that was pretty amazing as well. So if you do find something that's public, that has a lot of eyes on it, that can connect a lot of people and community, that could be a great way of starting off. So those were some of the limits that I would set. I'll get to your other questions, Corey, but did you have any follow-up questions for question 1?
No, that covers it pretty well. I appreciate that. That's really good advice.
Okay. So number 2, what if more detailed drawings are required for certain components? Yeah, this is a great question. So, and I want this to be very clear to everybody. Do not play at being a landscape architect. Don't play at being a civil engineer. Don't play at being a CAD draftsperson. We can design landscapes. We can design functional landscapes, but until you're trained in retaining walls, until you're trained in, the civil engineering behind that, you don't want to take yourself out of the scope of what you do. So this can be one of those things that you don't know what you don't know until something bad happens. And so generally, now that I'm at the level that I'm at, I will bring in specialists to produce an end result drawing, or if there is some cognition required, if there's some due diligence, if I need to bring somebody in. And the major way I do this is I usually have a bylaw, not a bylaw, what are they called? Urban planner. I have an urban planner who goes through the local regulations and makes sure that everything that I'm asking, or everything that the client is asking me to see if it's all right to do, I get a sense of if it's doable, and then what's the scope or the scale and what's the process for them to get that done. So I'm trying to think of the last time. Right. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I was doing a really big water impoundment, and the water officer I was working with had this conversation of, well, we're at this scope and scale where I'd really like, I feel better if we brought in an engineer and doing all this. And so I went back to the client. I said, listen, this is what the water officer is saying. And they said, yeah, great, awesome. And so it was just an extra added cost. And we brought in an engineer. They went through my drawings. They actually thought my drawings were great, and that I'd gone through all the processes really well. So that was good. But yeah, if you need certain detailed design drawings, I usually hire them out. And so you can make that clear with your client that, and you can show them normally what you produce. So it's like, I normally produce this. If you want something else, we can hire that. And so this client that I just took on, we may have to regrade, we will have to regrade their property, but they wanted a regrade plan that they could then hand to local earth mover, so that way they could regrade the landscape. So basically I reached out to actually a student from this class who I saw phenomenal work from, and they and a family member run a landscape architect firm, and they're able to do that, which is great. So I don't take on any more education or skill that I need until I need it, if that makes sense. There's this idea in Greek language, there's this idea of chronos and kairos, Kairos, chronos and kairos. And chronos is the progression of time, and kairos is the immediacy of time, like when an idea has come to bear or when you need something. And years ago, I used to love taking every single permaculture related class under the sun. I was just I was a hoarder of information. And something Bill Mollison said was that, pollution is unutilized resource. And that's true for education. And so I came up with this value of Kairos education. I would only take on courses, or I would only take on what I needed when I needed it. And that then applied when I found out about this Canadian designer who made a really good point. He said, don't become skilled in software. If you can find people who are really good at software and they can translate your ideas, there's always going to be something to keep up with when it comes to software. So don't become enamored or overambitious with software, because it can be a bit of a trap, a progress trap. You can become trapped in software. That's why I've always kept my software requirements very limited. And I've always kept to, I still know how to use a pencil. I still know how to use a digital tablet or a piece of paper, so I can draw my ideas and then I can send that to somebody and they can digitize them in a way that people want. I've always gone back and forth on this, like, should I actually go and get full training? But when I look at the amount of time, money, and energy it takes for the training, and when I take a look at the amount of designs I do, I do 4 to 5 designs a year max. I just don't feel like it's a good investment. I've taken on this idea of drawing, and I really like it. And if I ever wasn't able to do that, I'd be more than happy to use something like Google Slides or PowerPoint, as my buddy Neil Bertrando from RT Permaculture does, and then just give it to a client and be like, listen, we did spend time or money on making a professional grade rendering when we're going to do the work ourselves, or we can we know the contractor and we can relate to them and we can speak to them. There's just so many ways to get around that cost. So yeah, sometimes you do need to bring in somebody to do a detailed drawing, and I am going to for this project. And so when my client asked me that, I reached out to these folks. They gave me a price. I gave my client a price plus a small management fee because I'm going to have to go back and forth with them. And that would be something, again, to be upfront with your clients, either volunteer clients or free clients or paid. Just, let them know what you can produce. And this is the great thing about the OSU PDC, is that you actually have a body of work. You can say, these are the designs I produced. They're simple, they're easy. If you're looking for a landscape architect grade or a CAD level, we can hire that out, but that's not what I offer. This is what I offer. And that way you can just be upfront with expectations. Does that make sense, Corey? Any additions there?
No, that sounds great.
Okay, cool. Well, this usually includes supervising implementation and installation. It can, and I would suggest it should. So I love this course. This to me is one of the better, if not the best PDC online that I have seen. There might be some others out there that I haven't. I've seen Jeff Lawton's online PDC. I've seen a number of others, but because of the rigor we put students through in this PDC, because we go into so much in-depth design processing and elemental work, you end up with a huge leg up when you start. What you don't get, and you usually don't get with in-person courses anyways, yeah, you'll go outside, you'll plant a tree or make a compost or do like a design in the landscape and show water flowing, or there's some other, like, if it's a really great course and you've got the backup. I remember a course I ran years ago, we ended up actually putting in a small earthwork. We put in a hugelkultur. That's all well and good, but what you don't have after an online course is any type of hands-on experience. And so I would highly recommend getting that as soon as possible. And you'll find out very quickly if you are if you're built for project management, if you're built for wearing the white hard hat, so to speak, and playing conductor and going this way and that way. I just had to project manage a major flood in a house that the family owns. And it just reminded me of how much I love and how well I can project manage. I can put people in the right place and have them doing things and all the rest of it. But the installation process, like actually going through the process of, okay, well, what do I do next? And do I have the material ready for it? It's such an important mental exercise to go through, because that day of installation is very much an Olympic moment. You prep, you bring everything together. You have materials together, you have people together. If you're doing something like a perma blitz where you have all these people coming together to help volunteer, and they're learning, and you're taking time out to do little mini workshops or explanations, it's really a valuable skill to have, to know how to design a site, but then how to install it. And as a colleague of mine, Dave Bainline, who wrote the Practical Permaculture book that is recommended for this course, you go back and forth between designing and installing and managing and going into the landscape. Like I'm managing tropical fruit trees again for the first time. And it's so interesting to go back into that processing and going, oh yeah, tropics grow so fast that, usually in temperate climates, you prune and a year later, you see if you did a good job. In the tropics, it's like a month later. You're like, oh yeah, I did. That was pretty good. That wasn't terrible. That was terrible. I need to work on that. So I really would recommend installing and implementation as much as possible. And then if you want to lower the bar, I don't know if we talked about in this class, but there's this concept of orders of magnitude, and you'll have seen it in the materials of the course. But basically, there's this branching structure when it comes to trees, vegetation, and watersheds. So you've got like your main tributary, you've got the Mississippi, and then you've got the trunk of the tree, and then it branches and branches and branches. And so usually we have these orders of magnitude, or these ogives is the name of the pattern that gets to an order of magnitude of 7. Well, we want to make mistakes at that little trickle in the headlands, not at the Mississippi, because the consequences are a lot less. So when we get into installation and implementation, the smaller scope, and this is kind of bringing us back to your first question, Corey, like if you're just making a wicking bed and installing it and planting it and showing people how to manage it, great place to start. If you're doing little side yards or little side strips, great place to start. If you choose something to focus on, like you love rain gardens and maybe your city has a rain garden tax rebate because you're managing stormwater on site, which is what happened in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. They started to have this tax rebate years ago. And so I recommended a couple of my students to get into rain gardens, and they did. They became like the rain garden crew, and they became really, really popular. But that can give you a focus so that we are not trying to do everything. And this is where probably the largest cautionary tale I have around permaculture, specifically permaculture. There's something about permaculture and a lot of people in the demographic that like it. And I think it has to do with a little bit in schooling in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's kind of like you can be everything and do anything, which is kind of true sometimes. But I think a lot of people interpret that as I can be anything and do anything all at once. And that's not the case. You can't be everything and do everything all at once. You have to take process. You have to take steps to get there. And it's the same in permaculture. It's the same in regenerative land design. You have to be conscientious about knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and then targeting your weaknesses to learn and grow, but then being conscientious not to take on so many other projects that you have so much to learn in that project that you're just insanely overwhelmed all the time. And so when it comes to installation and implementation, if you can team up with somebody who's local, who's done this before and is looking for help, and just say, hey, I want to volunteer. All I want to do is pick your brain. And if you need me to run and grab things, if you need me to move things, if you need me to, teach a little bit, that would be lovely. But the main thing when you're reaching out to people in that way, and I can't emphasize this enough, is you have to show up with value. Don't show up as a problem. Don't show up as another piece of work that this person will have to monitor. I'm thinking of reaching out to this local dairy, these folks who used to do dairy farming, and then they landed locally here, and now they make hard cheeses, which is something I've been enamored with for years, and haven't had the local mentorship, but I've played a little bit with my own materials. But basically, I'm going to be approaching them within the next 3 months. I got to get over this sickness and like land and get myself sorted. But I'm going to be approaching them and saying, listen, I'd like to volunteer. You can have me do whatever job you want, but my main thing I want to learn is how to make hard cheeses. So, you've got me for 4 to 6 hours a day. I'm happy to do whatever it is you want me to do. But, a large portion of the time I'm here, I want to learn that skill. But here's everything I bring. If you need trees pruned, if you need materials worked up, if you want gardens installed, if you want overall planning, if you want drone photography, I come with so much skill that I try to make it very easy for somebody to go, okay, yeah, that'd be awesome. So just be conscientious when you come, to be very clear, like, this is what I'm looking for, and here's the skill I bring, here's what I can do. And sometimes that's like, if you need somebody to do scut work on the computer, if you need somebody to, do some data entry, if you need somebody to clean up your backyard because you're a busy landscaper, the carpenter's house, the gardener's garden is always not as beautiful as what we do for clients. But that then gives you an in to have a conversation with somebody and actually bring something of value to them. This also brings up another point about trade. Make sure that if you are offering trade, that you offer to do your portion of the trade first before that individual gives you trade back. This is something that I've made mandatory with anybody who wants to trade something with me, because I know I will follow through. But the number of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed students who come out of a PDC being like, hey, can we trade? And just haven't followed through made me realize I wasn't going to do that anymore. So I would be conscientious about that. But yes, I would say it can include implementation and installation. And in my opinion, it should. And you should move yourself into a place of, even if it's just supervising and directing, you know, you may not get yourself a truck with tools and all the rest of it. I did installations for years out of a 83 Jetta wagon, because I didn't want to take on the liability of the installation and whatnot. So I worked with contractors, and I just had clients contract them, and I came in to help direct. But I would, yeah, I would. Any follow-ups for that from you, Corey, or from anybody else who's watching?
No, that sounds great.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
So your final question here is, do you have any suggestions for large aging creosote railway ties walls that would be difficult to replace? This wall has a septic tank behind it, and erosion through the wall has led to sinking in one corner of the house. It's difficult. Is removal of the wall necessary? Have you ever seen a wall like this replaced through any natural methods? Okay, so I looked at this a little bit, and this is a serious job. This is not a small job. As I understand it, we've got sort of, I'll throw some lines on this just so we can go back and forth, and I can be clear on what I'm seeing is what you're intending. So it looks like it comes, I was wanting to use red. Thank you very much. So it looks like it kind of comes out this way, goes along this way, and comes in this way. And then what we're looking at, this septic overflow, is that septic overflow kind of out this way? Is that right?
It's back on the left side of this picture you're working.
This way?
So that's where the septic overflow is. This corner on the left side of that picture is the corner in the picture on the left is the same corner.
Oh, okay. So like this area is this area.
That's where the lift is. You can see the mechanical lift there on the bottom. So there's like tracks that come down. It's quite a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this would be one of those things where I'd be bringing in a contractor, somebody who has done this work before.
Mhm.
I know the major retaining wall blocks that they have now could probably do this pretty well in a short amount of time and space. Like the removal will probably take the most amount of time, and then you'll be bringing in those blocks. You'll probably sink them half a block or a full block, because you're in sand. They'll probably want to sink them a little bit more. But that's where the materials you use and the soil type would probably require a contractor or an engineer, just to be conscientious that you want to be sure. And this is probably why something like railway ties were used, because they're not super heavy and they're not going to sink in the sand. But of course, over time, they degrade. It doesn't matter if they're creosote soaked or not. They do degrade. So I'd probably reach out to a local stonemason, dry stack stonemason, or contractor who's worked with retaining walls. I'd probably reach out to like 3 or 4 and just ask them, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Would you mind coming out? Give me a sense of what that might look like. Get a couple of quotes, and then talk to them about, you know, how much of that could be done by me or friends. Could we do the removal? You know, what would be the risk of doing the removal and not having something to shore it up right away? Just being conscientious with them about time and money, because I'm sure those are concerns, as they always are. But that's probably how I would go about this if this was on a piece of land I had, and if I had the type of soil that you had. And then at the same time, if you were thinking about putting in other terraces to make more usable space, that might be a great opportunity to have these folks come in and say, yeah, I'm thinking about doing this in a couple other places. Like, what would be a good material to get a hold of? And, you know, that way you've just got a better sense of how to go about it. But if this was totally on my own and I was in the middle of nowhere and I had to do this myself, I could probably see doing it with dry stack stone, to be sure, but they'd be big. You'd probably be working with a mini X in terms of the size of the excavator. Or basically going back in, depending on cost, like if you do have a source for creosote railway ties that have been, you know, taken out of service, I might be convinced just to put it back in. This is the thing about the next stage of this work, which you'll get into in the final design. Budgeting and bill of quantities is pretty much everything. Like once you've got the design, it's like, okay, this is the design, but now it's like, okay, I could do this 7 different ways. Fencing is a great example. So they've they've got these, little tiny 3-inch, 5-inch, and 6-inch round pressure treated poles. They've also got square posts. They've also got metal. And if you go to metal, you're doubling your cost, but that fence you're never going to have to replace. And if you ever want to move that fence, you can't, because it's really easy to pop out those poles. If you work with wood, it's cheaper. Sometimes it's easier to put in. If it's hard ground, the pole will snap. And I remember, I think for a week, I was pricing things out, because as much as I want to support local, the local agricultural supply was a solid 30% more than a supply that would deliver if you were over $1,000. And then the metal was close to 2,000. It's that back and forth piece. So I would see if there's some local intelligence on the retaining wall. And then what I might also do is, I don't know if there is any documentation about the septic system, but I might see if there's some documentation about the septic system, and I may even bring a plumber or somebody who works with septic, like a septic installer, and just say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Pay them their time to come and give you some feedback. But this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? And they also might have seen something. It's because, this area looks like it was built out so that way the septic system had some space for infiltration. But have you ever seen any overflow from that septic overflow? Corey, are you there?
He's muted.
Oh, Corey, you need to take yourself off mute, man. I'm going to try and unmute you on my end. We lost you, mate.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. So when I got these houses first, the wall had sunken down. So I had to reconnect the pipe from the house to the septic tank.
Right.
And then here you can see on the left-hand image at the bottom of the green pipe, the pipe is kind of cocked.
Uh-huh.
So I've had to readjust that a couple times in 10 years down at the
Right.
bottom.
Okay.
See
So this
where
actually goes to another pipe or goes to another?
that goes into there's a couple different perforated pipes that go down into that's the overflow for the septic. The septic tank is up within the wall.
Okay, I got you.
So yeah, so I think the wall was actually built to hold the septic tank.
Yeah.
I did have a builder come. I've had people look at it and tell me if the wall fails that it's not going to affect the house much.
Right.
So I think it's mostly that the tank was built or the wall was built around the septic tank.
To insulate it.
Yeah, and what you see in this area is you do see all the creosote walls being replaced with the stone walls, but over time they all crack.
Yeah.
And that I just haven't seen it done right. And from what I've seen. So I mean, I a couple slides down, I have the side view, and what I'd like to see is a redesign where it has smaller terraces, because a 10-foot wall on such a steep hill, just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
So, I mean, but I think you're right. I do need to talk to engineers. Part of it is there's just the access is nearly impossible. There's an alley at the bottom of the hill, but if somebody tries to drive a truck down there to trim a tree, or it's always a complete nightmare.
Yeah.
Having any kind of truck back there.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm looking. I mean, I know live staking isn't that's gonna not quite do it for this.
No.
I'm considering whether I should try to do the septic somehow or replace it with something, greener, like, like a methane harvesting unit or something like that.
Right.
And then let the wall fail, and then, plant into the remnants of it.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things I'm thinking about. So, yeah, as you have pointed out, it's a tough situation.
Yeah.
So, as you can see, that's one of the reasons I'm looking to move down the hill too, is that it's a very complicated property that's sort of absurd in many ways. So not like a great place to, try to produce a lot of food and develop a system for,
Yeah.
you can't get a vehicle up here and all that. So
Yeah. And I think one of the things we talked about early on is that you have to start multiple systems for building soil here. Like you have to start multiple composting, multiple tree trimmings, because you have to be building some kind of organic matter, reaching out to local breweries or anybody who has, off material that potentially could provide, some organic material for you. But yeah, this is a toughie. I think generally I wouldn't necessarily work to replace the septic system with like a biogas digester. Usually you need, if you're running off human waste, you need about 6 to 8 people to continually be feeding it to get enough gas to justify the cost of it. Or you need like a small community. They work really well in small communities. I could see if you wanted to move, further into like composting toilets and Greywater reuse, especially on a site like this that is so porous and takes so much water. I could see Greywater reuse being useful. But in terms of that septic system, I would probably run out the clock on the septic system. I would keep it until it totally failed, and then just have all my materials or my planning ready to replace it. And then the fence, and then, this idea of a deck, like using that space, if it's already terraced, you may as well use it for a space to be. That makes really good sense. But I'd probably go with like large scale boulders, or I'd go with those monster blocks that they use for like industrial retaining walls. These are like the city blocks they use. I don't know if you've seen them. They kind of look like big Lego blocks.
Yeah.
Something like that. But again, it's such porous material. Like it's such a porous soil.
I like the gabions because they, you can fill them. You can literally carry buckets of rocks up and, like fill a gabion type thing.
Great idea.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's options. It's just, thinking about the wall as it fails and kind of how to address that. I've thought about, trying to maybe wrap it with some kind of mesh and then tie it back to the other side of the dune to give it some extra years.
What'll happen is you'll have to get a high strength, and then you'll have to tie in and around, and there's nothing to tie to, right? So,
well, what I do have like the whole area around the house is a concrete pad. There's a lot of, and then it wouldn't be too hard to think about how to plant some posts on the other, where the dune pitches down.
Sure.
Back on the other side.
The gabion isn't a bad idea, especially because it's relatively inexpensive. The materials are inexpensive. You could do the work yourself. And could be a great solution generally all over the site. If you start doing gabion terraces and then sinking them whatever you need to, like speaking with an engineer to understand what it is. I imagine you'd have to go down at least 5 feet, maybe 4. Just so that way they've got some stable base to be on, and they probably have to be pitched pretty good back. But that's probably a great thing to explore, because if if you work in some of the other areas that are a little bit less slope and then you experiment yourself with it, you find solutions for rocks, ways to bring them up, ways to have them in a good spot, and then staging the material, then you would have a good way of building that those terraces. And then you could practice on some of those order 7s, and then when you get to something like this, which is like an order 3 and order 2, then you really know what it is you're doing and how to go about doing it in a good way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do have a few other walls that need to be replaced first. So
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool, mate. Thank you for that question. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna pop back and see if anybody is. That's another question. Nope. All right. Well, Corey and John, anything else you want to chat about on our final session?
I do have a question. What would be considered acceptable as far as I have a pretty big site, and in my concept plan, I've actually resorted to using like one font to try to describe everything. Is that okay? Or should I be doing a lot of call outs, kind of blow
I see.
ups?
Yeah, if there's a lot of detail, I would, just so that way it makes it easier for you to design and put it all together. Yeah, generally I appreciate call outs, or I use programming that allows me to zoom in and out. It's one of the reasons why I like using Google Earth Pro or a digital design process, so I can zoom in and zoom out, and then I can design at scale. And then in a portfolio like this, I could just take a snapshot and show what it is I'm talking about. So yeah, I would, if there's lots of little details, water details or vegetation details, yeah, I would use as many callouts as necessary.
Another question is, there's a lot of detail overall. We're going to have a water plan, a soil plan, and then a planning plan. How much of that information needs to be duplicated, just for the sake of keeping everything clean? It's like, I don't know if I need to show my water plan on my overall concept plan.
No.
Or should I keep that as a separate?
Yeah, unless it looks like you can layer them and it makes good sense. And sometimes this makes sense with like simple lines for swales or irrigation or overflows. But if it looks too cumbersome and too clunky, then yeah, I would just make it a separate full plan. And what I might do is I might take my concept plan, make it grayscale, and then bring my water plan and put it over top. This is great if you're looking for feedback on earthworks, like here's all my plants, here's the grayscale, or here's all my plants in grayscale, here's my water plan in color, here's where all the flows are, here's the different line weights for swale or for in-ground perf pipe or for irrigation. And then I can look at it and I can discern what it is, so I can actually give you some useful feedback. If it can't be discernible, it's really hard to give feedback, and it'll be really hard for you as a designer to come back that and go, okay, I think I know what I was thinking here and what I was saying. So I find that grayscale really useful, which is one of the reasons why I put it in the template. So that way you've got grayscale. And then if you're doing like a soil plan, you can do your concept plan with the vegetation in grayscale. And then you can say, so this area I'm thinking of doing cover crops. This area I'm thinking of doing aerated compost extracts and teas. And this area I want to do mechanical decompaction because it needs it. And then I want to do vegetative decompaction. And then I want to do lasagna gardening because I think that's what it needs. And so if you've got that sort of, in the same way that you did your microclimate, where you had all these areas, right? And you show that on your soil map, and then you're like, well, I think it should look like this, and then like this, and then like this. Then for me as a grader, as well as somebody who's giving you feedback, I can look at it and I can go, I go back to the vegetative plan, go back to the water plan, and then go to this, and I'm going back and forth. And you've seen me, Mark, enough that you know that I do this. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, but why are you not doing mechanical decompaction here, but here? Like, is the soil that difference, or do you just not want to do it? So it gives me the chance to give you that sort of pointed feedback. But that's how I would do it. That grayscale, like take your concept design, turn it grayscale, just like you did with your base map, If you do need to give us a little bit of a legend just to make things legible, then great. And then give the rest of the space and time to the rest of it. And this may mean that you've got that first slide with like your goals and the different elements, and you generally have a sense of it. And then the next slide, you lose all that, you do a blow up of it, and then you go into all the nitty gritty of it so you can really explain it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question, John. Anything else, gents? Anything under the sun? Okay, well, it's been a great pleasure going through the class with you, gents, and for everybody who's watching, a real great pleasure. A couple reminders. Reminder number one, all assignments are due on that final date. So that means all assignments, which include any of your resubmissions. So I'm just going to pull up your class so I can make sure I've got the right date here. Here we go. So that final date, I think for you guys is March 13th at 9 a.m. So everything has to be in March 13th, 9 a.m. Resubmissions, new work, everything. Because of the way the courses go, we don't have any time over the flip over. So go at it that way. If you're in the class and you're thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to meet that, I totally get it. That's fine. Couple of options. You can re-enroll, reach out to Dow Orion, TAOORION via Canvas. Reach out to her, say, hey, Dow, I'm not going to make it. I need to re-enroll. She'll tell you the process and the price and all the rest of that. The other option is you may not want to get your certificate. And I think I said this on the very first class, but nobody really asks for a PDC. Nobody asks to see your certificate. I've never had anyone ask to see my certificate in all the years that I've been doing this. So it's nice to have. And in North America, we love having our certificates. My goodness. But it doesn't really matter. Nobody cares. They care about your work, which is why when Corey's questions came up, I was really like, what have you done? Show people what you've done. So there could be that option. If you did want to go through the course again and get more feedback again, it's kind of a great way to do it. Sometimes students will reach out and they want to contract some time for me for further mentorship as they're going along, same way I was talking with Corey. I do that. And if you're interested, you can reach out to me at javin@allpointsdesign.ca. I've mentored, I'm probably close to 25 students now that have come out of this program, which is great. I love helping people along and just helping them to, skip some of the frustrating pieces. The other thing I'll say is that there's some phenomenal courses coming up with regenerative living.online. The two major courses that are coming up, one is a rainwater harvesting course. So if you are interested in learning how to budget and audit the water use of a site, how to then design a rainwater catchment and storage and use design, we have, for me, the top of the Rainwater designers and installers as our instructor. We have Gord Baird from eco-sense.ca. Gord is an internationally trained and certified rainwater harvester and designer. Plus, because he made quite possibly one of the most integrated homes on the planet, eco-sense.ca, with his partner Anne, which is a 2-story cob load-bearing building that has all of its integrated systems. He really understands how to take a system and integrate it with everything else. He's also worked at scale. He's worked residential. He's worked small scale community. He's worked institution. Just a phenomenal amount of work this man has done. Plus, he's designed and installed these systems. So right now, he had to barge over to an island that doesn't have a ferry service, and he's there installing a system he designed. So you can't really get a better instructor. There's a lot of people who've written books about this subject that basically just collated information from academics who've never designed and installed a structure at all scale. And yet Gord has. So this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited that Gord is doing this course. The other course that I really recommend is Propagating Woody Edibles, Temperate Woody Edibles with Peter Janes. Peter Janes runs Tree Eater Nursery on Denman Island, British Columbia, Canada. Peter is a very humble human. We were joking the other day as we were talking about the work. He's like, I always think I don't have anything to tell somebody. And then somebody shows me their nursery setup and I have lots to say. And so Peter's going to be doing a phenomenal course. He just sent me the first materials. He has propagation schedules and calendar schedules. And I'm so stoked by his material. So that's coming up really soon as well. Both those courses, Gord's course starts mid-April and Peter's course starts the beginning of May. We'll have all the links to that in the show notes, and anybody else for John and Corey who are on here, it's in the notes document in one of the announcements previously. I'll bring it down as well. But highly recommend those two gentlemen and those two courses that are coming up. And basically get on the pre-launch list because they're both going to go live very, very, very soon. Especially Gord's course. So, and John, I'm seeing that you've unmuted again. I imagine you have another question.
I'm all set.
Okay, good. All right. Well, gents, great pleasure. I hope you do fantastic things with this work and continue on. I know you two in particular, I've seen your work and really impressed by it. So I do hope you continue. And for everybody else, same thing. We need a lot of people working in a lot of ways in the way that you want to, with your head, your hands, your hearts, and your spirit. So yeah, if I can be of any help in the future, please do let me know. And thanks so much. Looking forward to marking your final assignments. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Take
Kevin.
care. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're so welcome, man.